Steel being the exception because of the tariffs that we recently imposed on the Chinese, Russian, and Brazilian imports, as well as those from India. Steel prices have shot up very rapidly. In fact, they're up about 30% over the last quarter because domestic supply cannot keep up with domestic demand, and those imports, as a result of the tariffs, have fallen off a cliff. So this is a short-term supply-side squeeze that's not going to continue. You'll see prices for steel normalize, but right now the message is commodity prices are down significantly. That's putting a lot of pricing pressures on the overall metric of business-to-business activity. One of the most interesting things that I hear about all the time that I want to dispel is the fact that manufacturing is dying in this country. I could not disagree with this more. If you look at this bar chart or a graph that shows the output of the manufacturing sector over time, you can see that we're essentially near record levels right now, near the levels that we achieved before the recession. But I'll call your attention to the total volume of output, which says that relative to 20 years ago where we are, or 30 years ago, or longer before that, the volume of things that we make in this country is not going away. It's not shrinking. It's actually growing over time. And it's doing so because of 5 key advantages that manufacturing has in the United States. First and foremost, it's the trend of nearshoring. You're familiar with outsourcing, you're familiar with reshoring, but what we've actually seen happening is companies moving production to close geographic regions where the costs are lower than they are in their domestic markets. So in the case of the US, this is Mexico. In the case of Europe, this is states like the Baltics or Poland or Czech Republic. Even within Asia, we see this trend affecting manufacturing in a big way, with many companies moving out of China and going into places like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. But why would you say nearshoring is an advantage to the US? I'll use the auto industry as a great example. So when manufacturers were moving production to China and then importing the finished goods back into the US, we were only supplying about 4 cents of every dollar in components to the things that are manufactured in China. When you look at Mexico, 40 cents of every dollar that's manufactured in Mexico and then brought back into the United States is actually sourced from the United States. So it's a 10x impact that benefits the US manufacturing sector. Technology is also a great tool. We are at the forefront of implementing the best technologies available and using those to gain a competitive advantage. In my previous position, I was covering 3D printing or additive manufacturing. And I had a great example of a company, Tesla, using this technology to gain a huge competitive advantage. I actually have a friend that works at Tesla, and his job is to install the seats into the vehicles. Well, about a year ago, his boss came to him and said, I need you to shave off 40 seconds off of the installation of the two car seats that you're putting into the vehicle. And he said, okay, let me think what I can do here. He thought about the process itself. So in order to get the seat into the vehicle, you have to have the mounting plate in the all the way forward position. Then once you get it in order to actually bolt it down to the frame of the car, you have to move that assembly back all the way to the rear position. So he would actually sit there for 20 seconds for each seat, holding down the button that moved this entire assembly back. But he had access to a 3D printer on the side of the factory floor, and he was also familiar with AutoCAD, and so he used the program in about 15 minutes to design a plastic clip that cost 5 cents to print that he could put into place that held the button down for him while he went and got other tools or worked on another installation, essentially yielding that savings for his boss. Now, Tesla's going to make, let's say, optimistically 100,000 cars this year. But think about that one change being applied to Ford or GM or Toyota that are making millions of vehicles. It's really going to fundamentally change the manufacturing processes, not just the things that we make, which will also be transformed, but the processes themselves will benefit from the adoption of this technology. Capital averse labor. We are great at automating things in this country. You look at, for example, robotic sales in the automotive market were up 63%. The total volume of cars that we export from the US has gone from about 30,000 at the low of the recession to over 100,000 right now, and those manufacturers are certainly not making those extra cars by bringing in more physical human bodies. They're automating the plants, robotics, and so on is a huge, huge advantage for probably the single biggest difference maker though. Because when you think about the shale revolution, especially on the natural gas side, what you have to understand is that the fact that we pay so little for natural gas relative to other parts of the world means that our industrial electricity costs are 1/2 to 1/3 of what manufacturing